Hello and welcome in to Addison the 35th podcast. It is your Chicago Baseball Authority. My name is Herb Lawrence. You can follow me on X or Twitter. It is at Ecknerwall23. That is my last name, Lawrence, spelled backwards. 23 is for Robin Ventura. If you want to go to Blue Sky, go over there and look up herblawrence.bsky.social. You'll follow me over there. I retweet this show, of course, and I share some of my opinions on sports on Blue Sky also. Not a lot. But if you want to see what I'm doing in life, I share a couple stories on Instagram, the IG, as the kids like to call it. I like to send out some photos of what we're doing, especially of this weekend. I'm going to be sending out some photos of our trip to Pittsburgh, brought to you by the great folks at From the 108 Sox Machine, of course, our friends at Chicago Sports Bums, where we're going to have a great time this whole weekend at Pittsburgh. If you want to go and look at my stories this weekend, or if you're out there, take a picture with me so I can post it onto my IG stories. It's just my name, Herb Lawrence. So I'm really looking forward to this weekend. I'm hoping if you are driving out to Pittsburgh like I am on this Friday where this episode will be released, you're enjoying what we're going to be talking about in this episode, because it's always a great time to go down memory lane. And I was just on Locked On Sox, which is a show that Chris Tannehill and I started in 2019, talking about the White Sox in the good old days of White Sox baseball when they're ramping up to something great that we thought there were going to be some World Series appearances. But, I digress. And we talked with Todd Welcher, who's the great host of the Locked On Sox now. And we talked about the 2005 World Series winning White Sox. And man, I just so missed that team. And this past weekend, I was in Denver, so I didn't get to go to any of the games or really see any of the games of the 2005 World Series 20-year anniversary reunion that they had there at Rate Field in Sox Park. And so I eventually this week have caught up with what the festivities were, the Mark Burley jersey retire statue unveiling, then the whole team coming together on Saturday, and then the bobblehead of the 4 complete games in ALCS, which I heard went over very well. But man, just seeing those guys 20 years past the time where they took a team that I didn't think anything of when I began thinking about the season when March of 2005. I was still hyped from the Illini. I remember the day, April 4th, 2005, was both the national championship game with Illini basketball versus North Carolina. Of course, North Carolina won 75-70 in that game where Sean May was dominating and James Augustine just had another foul called against him. And that also that morning was the first game of the Chicago White Sox championship season, both figuratively and literally, where they won 1-0 versus the Indians at the time. Mark Burley was a great performance that day. And so you get that awesome day for me. April 4th, 2005 is probably a top 10 day in my lifetime. That's why I still remember it. That's why I still have fond memories of the year 2005, is because it started off so great. Even though the Illini lost that day, I didn't know that I was in for a great White Sox season, because if you guys recall correctly, the 2004 White Sox were good too. And they just ran into some problems where injuries just caught up to them. Maglio Ordonez's knee, Frank Thomas was out for an extended period of time, and they really didn't do much late in the year. Missed the playoffs by probably I think 8 or 9 games. I don't know specifically what they missed it by, but they were very competitive. And I was like, good team, but not a great team. Missed the playoffs in a time where you didn't really have the extended wild card. You had one wild card per league. And so the White Sox were not close to the playoffs that year. In this era, I think they would have made the playoffs as one of the 3 wild cards. But that offseason, they trade away Carlos Lee to Milwaukee for Scott Podsednik and Luis Vizcaino, which at the time I was like, man, why are we trading a young outfielder that's got some pop for this guy who can steal 70 bases? That's good. I see it. But man, that looks like a mistake. Boy, was I wrong. Then you let Magli Ordonez walk because you think his knee is shot, and there's no way that he can be the same player that he was in up leading up to 2004, which he was an all-star right fielder out there. If you guys remember, if you guys don't remember OEO Maglio, he was the thing out there in right field, hitting home runs, hitting doubles, catching the ball out and right. He was a pretty decent player for the Chicago White Sox. Him and Paul Konerko were the young stars of the White Sox, including Carlos Lee too. And there was kind of some buzz going on with all three of those guys as far as, so these guys are gonna be mashing the ball, and they did. Hit a bunch of home runs. That and Jose Valentin on that team also. You just feel good about, going to a White Sox game. You knew you're going to, see some offensive fireworks, but the games are going to be 8-7, 10-8, 9-6. It's going to be some high scoring affairs because they can really rock the ball out of the ballpark. And Magli Ordonez was part of that outfield. And so I was like, they're losing big time players. Yes, they have their superstar Frank Thomas coming back in 2005. Let's see what they can do. Jermaine Dye to replace Maglio? I guess so. This Pasednik guy to play left field? I guess so. I hope we're going to be good. Rowan's going to be taken 2005, and he's going to be the center fielder, bar none. He's the guy. I love Aaron Rowan. I still do. Big time Bears fan. Loves Chicago. And he was sitting behind Kenny Lofton when they brought him in. I think they brought Kenny Lofton in probably 2003, and Rowan had to sit behind him. Remember one time where me and Jonathan Hood, who I was his producer, so it had to be earlier than 2003. I was Hood's producer in 2001, I believe. So Rowan was there at that time, and Lofton was either there in 2001 or 2002. So we would go and visit Rowan, who was a backup player at the time, got a little run every once in a while, but we would go and visit him just to say, hey, man, thank you for coming on our show, put face to name at guaranteed rate. It's like, hey, man, really appreciate you. And then chop it up with him about the Bears because he, like I said, huge Bears fan. And I remember Kenny Lofton getting pissed at two black dudes, Jonathan Hood and myself, talking to this backup white dude where we could be talking to him. Like he was kind of perturbed. He's like, I'm a borderline Hall of Famer, and you're talking to this bum? Like, and he gave us that stank eye. I remember so clearly. There's only two people in clubhouses, and I'm digressing from the whole 2005 story. So you have to keep with me. This is what I do. I go on tangents from some time to time. Today is no notes. I'm just going 2005 centric the whole show. But him and BJ Surhoff, Kenny Lofton and BJ Surhoff are the only two players in a major league clubhouse that gave me stank eye for no particular reason. I didn't say anything to them. I didn't look at them weird, but just like my presence in the clubhouse threw Kenny Lofton off because I was talking to Aaron Rowan and BJ Surhoff. I was just in the visitors dugout over at Wrigley well before the time where they kicked the reporters out. So it was probably like an hour and a half before the game. And I think at that time they kicked the reporters out 60 minutes before the game starts. But I was sitting in the dugout waiting for somebody on the Atlanta Braves to do something. But I just remember looking down to BJ Surhoff just giving us the most evil eye. Like, you guys don't belong here type of look. I was like, excuse me? And, BJ Surhoff is not a small guy. There was no challenging there. I was not going to be fighting him, and nor would I fight any Major League Baseball player because while I do have a right to be there, and it is also my working domain, some players think it's more their domain, and that reporters and producers at the time that I was are invading on their space. And I can kind of understand it because if you've ever been in the Wrigley Field visitors clubhouse or the visitors locker room, friends, so small. But let's get back to the regular schedule programming. Loved Aaron Rowan. Loved Mark Burley coming back. Garland. Didn't know anything about Jose Contreras. Wasn't very jazzed about that because we gave up Esteban Loaiza, who was really good for the White Sox, and we're kind of trading our garbage for their garbage, where Jose Contreras wasn't the guy that the Yankees wanted him to be, and Kenny Williams, in the fashion that he continued to do after the 2005 World Series victory, getting a player on the team that failed somewhere else and thought that he can bring him to Chicago and that player start producing like he should at the original stop or stops. He did that with Jermaine Dye. He did that with Jose Contreras. A little bit with Freddie Garcia, even though Freddie was well established and really didn't fall off the table from his days with Seattle. I mean, he was a top of the line star with Seattle Mariners. With the White Sox, he was pretty good, like a mid-tier, middle of the rotation guy on that roster. And just, I didn't know if you're going to get premium stuff from him either. So, and the fifth starter thing was kind of up in the air. I think they tried a young player, Brandon McCarthy, late in the year. He was really good for the White Sox and didn't make the actual roster in the playoffs. Still got a ring. Duque was kind of terrible in the regular season. And I was like, got this last legs guy on the team. He's terrible. Good job, Kenny. Really struck out there. And then they traded for AJ Pierzynski, or signed AJ Pierzynski from the San Francisco Giants. And I was like, I remember him from the Twins. I don't like that. That's not good. So, like, Kenny Williams, for all the mess that he takes as far as a general manager and what he has done after the 2005 World Series, you have to give him credit. This is the thing that I get mad at White Sox fans the most, where they crap on Kenny Williams because his overall tenure as a White Sox wasn't successful. But no other White Sox general manager has ever done what Kenny Williams has done. And only one other general manager in Chicago history has done, or baseball ops guy has done what Kenny Williams has done, is win a World Series here in this town. And that can be, if you want to give it to Theo Epstein, or if you want to be specific and give it to general manager Jed Hoyer, be my guest. But there's not a lot of people in this town that we call home that has done what Kenny Williams has done. Flukish, luck, call it what you want. They did it. And you got to give him credit for putting all these, what's the old term called? Just a Frankenstein of a team. Putting together broken pieces from other organizations and bringing them together for a collective unit. Because if you look at the 25-man roster of that 2005 World Series team that actually was on the World Series roster, only 3 of those players, 3, were drafted by the White Sox, brought through the White Sox system, and were on that team. I'll give you a couple seconds to think of those 3 players that the White Sox got. Pause it right now. Okay. The answer, I've already gone over them. Aaron Rowan, center fielder. Mark Burley, pitcher. I think he was a 38th round draft pick in 1999. Pitched for the 2000 The Kids Can Play team in the playoffs. And the third player was the player that I think White Sox fans have done a 180 on the most. Joe Crede. If you recall, early in Joe Crede's career, they were comparing him to other great third basemen in White Sox history. Bill Melton, and especially Robin Ventura. Like, the Robin Ventura era had just been fresh over. And so they're thinking, okay, this guy eventually is going to be just as good as Robin Ventura with both the glove and the bat. Maybe not as much with the glove, because Robin Ventura was a 5-time Gold Glover. But Joe Crede, as you guys know, was no slouch with the glove. And up till that point, like before the 2005 season, Joe Crede hadn't been that guy. He really wasn't living up to expectations. And throughout the 2005 season, you're really looking at, all right, he's good. He's doing a good job, but he's not that guy as yet. You know what he did? Joseph Creedy saved the best for last because, yes, most of that season was a walk as the White Sox, I think, started their first 37 games, I believe it was, where they had the lead in each one of those games. Their record was negligible at that time. I wouldn't even count it, but I don't remember what their record was at the time. But that was part of the White Sox that year. They just did everything to win and had the lead in so many games. And they went through adversity. Like, it wasn't like a cakewalk as far as everybody stayed healthy. There were no controversies, um, no bad players on the team, none of that stuff. They had people get hurt. Shingo Takatsu got hurt. He was the White Sox closer in 2005. Dustin Hermanson also pitched well and was a closer for the White Sox. Got hurt. Then they went to a young player off the scrap heap. As I said, the MO of Kenny Williams, giving second and third chances to players that might have fallen on hard times with their old organizations. So Bobby Jenks enters him, and he has a phenomenal rookie year for the Chicago White Sox and becomes a phenomenon that year and forever for Chicago White Sox fans. And we recently just lost Bobby Jenks, and I want to stop and say that player, that man, you hear all the tributes from his former teammates, from people who knew him. I met him only one time in 2020, right before the pandemic started. He came to the Score Studios, and I was working as producer on the Lawrence Holmes show at that time, I believe. And just talked about his life, talked about his struggles, what happened with him when he went out there to Boston, where I think he had some malpractice performed upon him as ended his career prematurely that year, or and his 1 year in Boston kind of was salty after that, and was trying to find his way back into baseball because that kind of soured him onto baseball. And the stories he would tell about the 2005 team and his at the time record, I think he got 45 guys out consecutively, and subsequently, I think, broken that same year by his teammate Mark Burley after Mark Burley's perfect game in 2009, and then the subsequent start he had versus the Minnesota Twins. I think he broke Bobby Jenks' record. But Bobby was loved by all his teammates. White Sox fans from afar loved him. It's sad when anybody dies, because that is a life that is no longer here with us on Earth. But especially sad when the person is young. He's younger than me, which is very sobering. That I think he was 44 years old. I am 46 as we record this. And to see somebody who is younger than I am, it's always sad, because I know I'm not that old, and I could not imagine only having that amount of time here on this earth. And also, he leaves some kids and a wife that, loved him, cared for him. And so that's very sad to see him pass away. But I hope the White Sox, and they're going to be keeping his memory with the caricature on right by their dugout and a patch on their jerseys. And so keeping Bobby Jenks' memory alive, because he meant a lot to the organization as a whole from what he did, not just 2005, but as a closer for the team for majority of his career, and also what he did for 2005, which was much more than being on the roster. ESPN. Just get I try to stay away from that ESPN bias thing, because I thought initially it wasn't a real thing, but man, they cannot help themselves from disrespecting White Sox and White Sox fans. It's so annoying. I hate it with a passion. Respect us. Respect us. Saying a Houston Astro was the World Series champion. They didn't win a game in the World Series, as we all know. That went down as an ass whooping, even though the White Sox, I think, only won those games by one run. I think most of those games, those are wins. And Burke didn't win any. 0. Bagwell, 0. Biggio, 0. Scrap Iron, no games did he manage to a win. Bradledge, 0 games. Gave up a game-winning home run in Game 2 to Scott Podsednik. Bradledge, 0 wins. Gave up the World Series winning single by Jermaine Dye right up the middle, scoring Willie Harris. None. So never, ever part your mouth or type on the keyboard disrespect about this 2005 World Series winning Chicago White Sox. This team is why we are still White Sox fans. Well, let me not speak for you. It's why I'm still a White Sox fan. Because it's given me joy throughout the 20 years since it's happened. The day it happened, October 26, 2005, was the greatest day of my life. It has been replaced by Courtney and I's wedding day, as that was so fulfilling and a thing that I didn't expect to be as great as it was. It was better than I could even imagine. October 26, 2005, excellent day. Had the time of my life. And subsequently, every time I think about the 2005 World Series, I smile because this team, as I said, wasn't expected to do it. And when they got to the playoffs, initially they have to run right into the reigning champs at the time, the Boston Red Sox. Everybody loves them. They still have their horses. And it's still going to be a challenging series because the White Sox at that point hadn't been to the playoffs in 5 seasons. They went to the playoffs, as I said, the 2000, the Kids Can Play team, who got swept by the Seattle Mariners. And so you go into that series. Yeah, you have the most wins in the American League with 99 that year for the White Sox. But you're still kind of nervous because the world champs are across from you. And immediately bludgeoned the Bo Sox. Immediately crushed Matt Clement. I think they won. They scored 12 runs in game 1. Then they had game 2 where you get Chris Berman, another ESPN guy. Kind of sad that Tony Graffinito makes an error on the Tadahito Iguchi. I think just a dribbler up the middle, which should have been a double play. But a run scored on that one. The White Sox eventually win that game. I think Tadahito Iguchi later in that game hits a home run off of David Wells. Awesome. 2-0 going to Boston. You're like, all right, here we go. And then they get the lead. Or the White Sox get the lead. Paul Konerko has a great game. Then bases loaded, no outs. El freaking Duque Orlando Hernandez. I don't need to tell you that man absolutely killed it. Killed it. Where I think he strikes out. I don't know the order. Is it Johnny Damon, Tony Graffinito? They both strike out. And then an easy ground ball. And Duque gets out of that. Because if they win that game, I think they have Curt Schilling in game 4 in Boston. And then that's the team in 2004 Boston Red Sox the year before, or 2005 Boston Red Sox the year before. They came back from 3-0 versus the Red Sox or versus the Yankees. So you're like, this team is never out of it. So the White Sox got to kill them. They immediately killed them. Go to the ALCS. Lose game 1 to Paul Bird because Paul Bird does Paul Bird things. At the time, mediocre pitcher versus everybody else. Champion versus the White Sox. Then you get the AJ thing in game 2. He gets the first base on a drop third, and you get the RBI double by Joe Creedy, which I told you. He stepped up. Not only there, stepped up in the playoffs or before the playoffs when the White Sox were going through some tough times and Cleveland was coming back. Joe Creedy hits the walk-off off Dave Risky and then comes back in the playoff game, hits the walk-off winner, the double to score Pablo Ozuna, who was pitch running for AJ Przinsky there. Complete game, by the way, Mark Burley in game 2. Go out to Anaheim, Paul Konerko takes over. Home runs, a galore. The White Sox dominate. You get the complete games from Freddie, from John Garland, and from Jose Contreras. The White Sox go to the World Series after winning 4-1 versus the Angels. And as I said, dominated the Houston Astros. Roger Clemens gives up the first inning home run to Jermaine Dye. Is hurt afterwards. He's hurt. Weird. He knew it was going to be a loss that day. The White Sox win that game. Of course, game 2 is you get the Paul Konerko grand slam to take the lead. And then you get the Scott Podsednik home run to win the game off of Brad Lidge in the rain, where Pope Leo the 14th was in attendance. Game 3, of course, they were losing 5-0, I believe, or 4-0 to one of the best pitchers in baseball, in Roy Oswalt. Came back, tied that game up. That game goes to 14 innings. At the time, it was the longest World Series game in history, over 5 hours. And then in the 14th innings, top of the 14th, newly acquired from the trade deadline, very little played, Jeff Blum, who is currently a Houston Astros color commentator. He has been since pretty much his retired. Hits a home run in the 14th inning off his former and future team to win the game for the Chicago White Sox in game 3. Technically, that game ended on October 26th. Game 4, also on October 26th, you get the brilliant performance from both Backy and Chicago White Sox starter Freddie "The Rock" Garcia. And as I stated before, Lidge comes in the game, 8th inning, gives up a single up the middle to Jermaine Dye. Willie Harris scores the one run that wins the game for the White Sox. In the 9th inning, Bobby Jenks comes in, gets a pop-out of, I think it was Chris Burke, not World Series champion Chris Burke, World Series losers Chris Burke, which Juan Uribe catches in the stands. To this day, still the best catch any shortstop has made when he goes into the stands. I'm looking at you, Derek Jeter. I'm looking at you. And then, of course, Uribe charges throws out, and the White Sox win the World Series, to paraphrase John Rooney. Game over. That's Bobby Jenks. That's AJ Przinsky. That's Ozzie Guillen. By the way, statue and number need to be retired immediately. That's Kenny Williams. That's Jerry Reinsdorf. As a White Sox fan, I felt like everything was going to be all right. Because the thing that I thought would never happen, happened. And it made me feel much better about everything around me, which it shouldn't. It's just a game. But, like, you know, when people tell you, like, food tastes better, you know, you sleep better, things look brighter. That happened to me. And I was a 26-year-old kid that had dreamed of this moment since I became a White Sox fan when I was around 11 or 12. And I didn't have to wait as long as some fans where they had to wait 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, some 80 years to finally see their favorite baseball team do what they had failed to do for 88 seasons. Like, it felt euphoric in a way that I cannot explain to you. But I still, when I go back and think about what happened that year, it this is a thing that if there are any regrets in my life, this would be it. I enjoyed the 2005 World Series at the time that it was happening, and all the immediate months after into next year where they celebrated pretty much the whole year. But I feel like 46-year-old Herb would go back and tell 26-year-old Herb, hey, man, really lean into celebrating this World Series a lot more than you did. Knowing the subsequent years of White Sox baseball won't come close to this feeling. You won't have as not a feeling in the same neighborhood as this while they go to the playoffs in 08 and the last game, blackout game, feels good. Loud stadium, atmosphere great, catch to end the game, Tomei's home run, all that stuff. 1 year. Got killed by the Rays 3-1. 2020, no one in the stands. It's in Oakland. Lose 2-1. Fluke ass season. Went to the playoffs, didn't feel that great. 2021, win the AL Central for the first time since 08. But we all know what happened. Astros dominated the White Sox. Game 3, just one of the best feelings I've had, and I think it's because of the dearth of actual playoff electricity and playoff wins like they did in Game 3. Like, I think that's what made that stadium pop like it did in Game 3. You know, beating the Astros is always good, but I felt like, you know, you haven't won a game in front of your fans. Remember, this is the first year and first time really you're in front of the fans for a playoff game because of the whole pandemic the year before. And so fans went wild because of that. The fans went wild because of the lack of postseason success. And the Lurie home run off of Yimi Garcia gave Lurie $16.5 more million. And it lit the crowd on fire. And myself, Sean Anderson, and Chris Tannehill, were in the Score Studios because we're doing post game for that on the 670 The Score. I think both on the web and on the actual live radio. We did the post game there, and man, we could not keep us from smiling throughout the whole show. It was such a great feeling. But all those pale in comparison to 2005. And so that guy who was celebrating when he was 26 and 27, man, I wish I can go back and say, man, dive into this. Get sick of celebrating this championship, because now I think about it, it's like, man, it is hard to win a championship. And when you do, celebrate the hell out of your wins. And that was the ultimate win. And that's what I'm messaging I'm going to leave on this tonight. Whether it's winning a World Series, closing a deal, getting a date with that person that you've been wanting to get a date with. As simple as dropping something out of your hand and then catching it on the ground, catching it before it hits the ground. Whatever it is, celebrate your wins. And forget the haters on the side who will be critiquing you. Oh, you're going to act like you haven't been there before? you know what? Life is short, as we've seen with people in our own lives passing away. Rest in peace to my aunt, Nisi. She was 76, I believe. Or people who are in the 2005 World Series, like Bobby Jenks. One of these days, I'm not going to be here, and you're not going to be here. The last thing you want to do is listen to other people's opinion about you celebrating your wins. Celebrate your wins all the time and celebrate them as hard as you want to. Don't let me, because sometimes I'm a hater, or anybody else tell you you can't celebrate and tell you how you should celebrate. Believe me, I'm a curmudgeon. I have my little idiosyncrasies about things I like and criticize other people. Bump all of that. If you feel like you should do something, do that thing and don't listen to outside interference. So that's the one thing, as in a retrospect to looking back at the 2005 team, that I wish I would have celebrated harder. I would have sang Don't Stop Believing ad nauseum. Would have drank more, smoked more, enjoyed my White Sox friends more. But I didn't. So I begged the current White Sox to find a way. I know it won't be in the next 5 years. I probably have, if we're going by family standards, 20 to 25 years to go, maybe 30, if I'm lucky. Knock on wood. Hell, if I get 40, God bless. Within that time, when I'm here on this earth, give me another one. Not just going to the World Series, winning the World Series. So we can all feel that way again, and we can all celebrate that win again. My name is Herb Lawrence. You can follow me on Twitter, actingwild23, or on Blue Sky. It's herblawrence.bsky or .social, or Herb Lawrence on Instagram. I'll see you this weekend, hopefully, out there in Pittsburgh. Me and my wife are going. It's our first time in Pittsburgh, firstly, and then our first time ever going to be going to the PNC Park. So we're going to have a great time this weekend. And I hope that we see you all there. We have an enjoyable time, and we get a couple of White Sox victories because we need it. And we see Paul Skeens. I hope he does pitch versus the White Sox, because I want to see an all-time great pitch versus the White Sox and see what he can do and what the White Sox can do versus him. Hope I see you guys this weekend. Next week, we're going to be talking a little bit more about what the team is doing. Congratulations to Shane Smith, who was not only an all-star, but got to pitch in the game. I mean, did hit a batter, and sorry about that. But, what can you do? I'm sorry about that. We'll talk more about the team, who's going to be here after the July deadline, who is not going to be here. So, for my other partner, who is Ryan Herrera, does the Addison the 35th Cubs version, he'll have an episode out the same day as I'm going to have it out. You're listening to this. You're listening on Friday, hopefully, or Saturday. Ryan Herrera will have a Cubs version. And if you're one of those Cubs Sox fans, listen to his version of Addison the 35th too. I'm Herb Lawrence. Addison 35th is the podcast. Good night.